Another episode of the Bulldog Broadcast brought to you by one of our supporting sponsors, McGilvery Environmental. Thank you to Kip and his team for supporting the Bulldog Broadcast. You have environmental landscape needs, dirt work needs, whatever it might be, Northern Idaho, Eastern Washington, Western Montana. Look up McGilvery Environmental. They do a phenomenal job. They'll treat you right, and you will not be disappointed in the work that Kip and his team put forth. The other sponsor I want to thank is Shoot 360 Corporate. There's a location in Spokane. There's locations all across the United States. They're expanding worldwide. If you are a basketball player or you have kids that are a basketball player, check out Shoot 360 for the most technologically advanced basketball training facility out there.
The world's leading immersive basketball training experience that combines in-person skill development with digital gamification and virtual competition. At Shoot 360, you will train with our coaches, measure your skills with our proprietary technology, and track your progress on the Shoot 360 mobile app. Shoot 360 Spokane. Unlock your game.
If you are a potential sponsor interested in being a part of the Bulldog Broadcast, send an email to dandickau@hotmail.com. Would love to share more with you. We've got another sponsor in the works. They'll be in next week. Can't wait to share a little bit more about them here in the Spokane area. So for the Bulldog Broadcast, big time thanks to McGilvery Environmental and Shoot 360. Listen in to my recap of Kentucky and my preview of UConn, as well as an interview with ESPN's Jimmy Dykes. Welcome to the Bulldog Broadcast on the Field of 68 Media Network. I'm your host, Dan Dickau. Going to recap a little bit of the Kentucky game. I'll do a little bit on my own, but also towards the end, we will include an interview with ESPN's Jimmy Dykes. He was the color analyst on the game in Seattle at Climate Pledge Arena, where Gonzaga lost in overtime to Kentucky. But we're also going to preview a little bit of the UConn game, the big game coming up Saturday at the Mecca of college basketball, maybe the Mecca of basketball in general, Madison Square Garden. So that should be a phenomenal matchup. But first to the Kentucky game. What a game. And I say that with a little bit of frustration, disappointment as a former Gonzaga player, as a Gonzaga fan, someone who pulls for them when the situation calls for it. But when you look at just the overall atmosphere, tremendous college basketball game. Climate Pledge Arena continues to get rave reviews as a host for basketball events, in particular college basketball, where the atmosphere was great. You had two high-level teams going at it. Jimmy Dykes in the aforementioned interview talked about it was an Elite Eight type game as far as two heavyweight titans going at it. But Gonzaga looked terrific in that first half. They're up 50-34. They led by as many as 18. But Kentucky made the adjustments at halftime and throughout that second half that really proved to be the difference maker. I think when you look at Gonzaga, that first half, they were able to get Graham Ike really involved. Ryan Nembhard was really a problem for Kentucky in regards to pick and roll, making plays, decision making, whether it was score it, whether it was getting into the teeth of the defense, putting the defense in rotation, finding guys, whether it was kicking it out to shooters where they could attack a closeout, or finding role guys such as Ike or Ben Gregg, which I believe he found on occasion or two for buckets. But, end of the day, they ended up losing 90-89 in overtime. You got to give Kentucky a lot of credit because they had just come off a loss on the road at Clemson after rising to the rankings at 4. They stay at the rankings at 4 after beating Gonzaga, but tremendous response from Mark Pope and Kentucky. There was a lot of question marks about Mark Pope's hiring in Lexington, and that should not be the case after seeing what they've done early in this season. They've molded experienced veteran guys through the transfer portal, gotten them to play in the style and the way that he wants them to play. And it's very reminiscent of what they did at BYU. Space the floor, create a lot of opportunities through split actions, pick and rolls, dribble handoffs, a lot of freedom to shoot from behind the three-point line. Their goal, I believe, is to shoot 33s a game, and I think they shot 34 against Gonzaga. When you look at it on paper coming in, Lamont Butler out, you would think Gonzaga would have the advantage. They did in that first half. Kirk Kriisa, the West Virginia transfer after transferring from Arizona, had some nice stretches, and then he left the game late with an injury, and then it basically essentially brought in their third point guard, who's really a two guard, and he plays plenty of minutes anyways, Jackson Robinson, into the game, who followed Mark Pope from BYU to Kentucky. But he showed some great minutes at the point guard position. His size, his length bothered Nembhard at times. And then he was also able to see over the top of the defense on some occasions and make some really good plays for Kentucky to pull away. But, Andrew Carr had a really good game, the Wake Forest transfer for Kentucky. But I think the big thing when you look at it is this. Gonzaga, as good as they played in the first half, their offense was flowing. It was moving. The ball was getting side to side. And Nembhard was in pick and rolls, getting downhill, able to make all the decisions that he wanted to make. And Kentucky made the adjustment to go zone in the second half. And it wasn't your traditional 2-3 kind of stand your hands up zone. It wasn't a 2-3 matchup where you bump cutters off and you adjust and you move. It was more of a 1-3-1. And with that 1-3-1, they had a couple different variations depending on when in the shot clock a pass went to a certain point on the floor, or dribble penetration happened and the ball moved to a different part of the floor, where then they would quickly match up and stay man. And I think really what it did was that initial lineup of the 1-3-1 showed a little bit of a stop sign to Gonzaga and their offense. Are they man? Are they zone? What zone are we in? What do we run? And this is true of a lot of teams. If you want to get them out of the rhythm, you might throw, and I'm not calling the 1-3-1 a junk defense in any sort. It's not like a triangle 2 box and 1. It's more of, okay, what do we run? And just that little bit of a pause many times for an offensive team that's in such a flow like Gonzaga was in that first half, get you out of your rhythm in no time. And then sometimes it's hard to get it back. And that's really what happened. And then the fact that they mixed up staying in that zone and then going from that zone to when the ball was entered somewhere or there was dribble entry to a certain point of the floor, they'd go back to man, really kind of made Gonzaga play back on their heels in that second half. The other thing that zone didn't allow Gonzaga to do was get into pick and roll actions with Ryan Nembhard, which obviously he's proved throughout the first quarter, third of the season that he's as good as anybody in college basketball in that pick and roll. But I think you're going to see, if you're Gonzaga, you're going to see a lot more zone leading into this next stretch of games. You might see it against UConn, probably not. They're mostly a man team, but you might see it on occasion just to junk things up. You won't see it against UCLA because Mick Cronin's teams won't play zone. But I think you might see a little bit of that mixed in once you get into league play. But the other reason I think you might see some more zone against Gonzaga is they're not shooting the ball very well from the three-point line. There have been a couple guys that have had some nice stretches to start the season, shooting it from beyond the arc. Nolan Hickman's had a couple good games. Caliph Battles had a couple good games. Dusty Stromer's had a couple 2-for-3 type games. But, they struggled again from beyond the three-point line. When you look at the numbers, and I've got them right here, Gonzaga was 6 of 27 from the three-point line. Nolan Hickman, 1 of 7. Nembhard, 1 of 5. Battle, 1 of 5 from beyond the three-point line. And that's in a big game. And you want your big, and it's cliche, you want your big-time players to step up in big games and big moments. And unfortunately, guys weren't able to step up and knock down those shots when maybe late in that second half, they could have created a little bit more of a cushion and or put the game away. Or made a shot in overtime, after to stem the tide after Kentucky jumped out with the first couple buckets in overtime. But, all in all, I think you look at Graham Ike had a really good game in regards to scoring it. 28 points, 11 rebounds, although the majority of those came in the first half when it was man-to-man and Nembhard was finding him. And then at the free throw line somewhat late, he had some buckets as well. Nembhard continues to be a maestro in regards to getting others involved. 13 points, 10 assists. I believe it was only 1 turnover. So He's still leading the country in assists. I believe he's leading the country in assist to turnover ratio. If he's not leading it, which because he's around 6.5 to 1, somebody is absolutely having another amazing start to their season. But the bench had a little bit of production, although you got to get more. Ben Gregg had another good game, 14 points off the bench. Stromer had 6. Uh, Huff only had 2 points in 9 minutes after such a big game against Kentucky and Lexington a year ago. And Innocenti had a few minutes, mostly for defensive possessions, but he didn't score. But when you look at it, you talk about, and this happens every year, you talk about the depth of Gonzaga. They've got this. You start talking about all the options and opportunities and ways that they could play. But at the end of the day, you only got so many guys and you only have so many minutes, and you have to figure out a rotation that fits. And I think what we're starting to see really is Gonzaga settling in on an 8-man rotation. Actually, I could call it 8.5, because I think Innocenti is definitely in the mix to get some more minutes. But Diani, yes, I know he's been dealing with a couple injuries, nothing major, nothing serious, as well as June just haven't shown the ability that they are going to be in the rotation. So essentially, you have an 8.5-man rotation, but you got to find a little bit more pop to get some production consistently from some of these other guys. The other guy that I'm looking to get really going this season, and I know this was a big game for him, and he's going back to his home area in the Seattle area, would be Michael Ajayi. Struggled with fouls, had 4 fouls in 21 minutes, only 1 of 4 from the field for 4 points. You look at his numbers last year, he shot around 46% from the 3-point line. So if the average fan sees those numbers and think that, he's a knockdown 3-point shooter coming in, really what those numbers dictated is last year is that he took good shots. He took wide open shots. He didn't force it. And in the flow of Gonzaga's offense, he's gonna get more of those 3-point looks. So I look to see him improve upon, where he has and how he shot it early in this season, because I think that you're going to definitely find, and Gonzaga staff will find more ways for him to get opportunities. I mean, you're looking, you're 9 games in now, you're 7-2, you're ranked 8th in the AP poll. You should have those initial jitters out. And so I think it's any game now, he's going to turn the corner and really find his stride and impact games more in the scoring column than he has up till now. Somebody mentioned it to me the other day when I was out and about in Spokane. Is it time to shuffle the deck on the starting lineup and move Ben Gregg back in? And I don't think that's the case at all. Obviously, I think Ben Gregg is good enough to be a starter. He proved it last year. But that spark, that energy he's bringing off the bench, and now the production in particular, the last 2 games, is exactly what they need. I think in regards to Michael Ajayi, as I was touching on, is he's just got to continue to get comfortable. He's shown the ability to rebound. He's shown the ability to defend. He's shown the ability to score around the rim. And now it's just becoming a little bit more aggressive when the opportunity arises. And he showed it last year at Pepperdine, and it's only a matter of time. Although now that we're more than halfway through the non-conference, you hope to see that happen soon. But at the end of the day, Gonzaga schedules in such a way that if you drop a big game or 2 like this one, it's really not going to impact you, because you lose to Kentucky, ranked 4th. You drop 1 in the poll. You go from 7 to 8, and your net ranking, last I checked, it was yesterday, was still sitting at 3. Your Ken Palm numbers, I think you were still sitting at 3 or 4. But you kind of load up your schedule and you prove that you're one of the top teams in the country. And I think if there was an interesting stat that I read today, over the last 15 years, after week 6, when that 6th week AP poll comes out, if you are ranked, every national champion has been ranked in the top 12 of that poll. Well, where does Gonzaga sit? They sit at number 8. So shows you that for them to win the national title is still very probable, and is still very real possibility. Now, you look at Tennessee and surprising people. You look at Kentucky, who we touched on, they've surprised people. You look at Marquette. There's so many teams right now that, because of the transfer portal and NIL, you can get right in a hurry. And if things gel together well quickly, you're going to climb up in those rankings in no time. some of the teams might take a little bit longer to kind of gel and be cohesive. And I think a lot of that alludes to UConn and the expectations that are placed there to be able to have a great season. But, you can get right in a hurry in the transfer portal. But the big takeaway from that last piece was last 15 years, if you're ranked in the top 12 of the AP poll after week 6, you've got a chance to win a national title because every title winner has been ranked at that stage of the season. So moving on to UConn, this is a game where, it's very important. I mean, UConn preseason top 5 in basically every publication. They didn't play a difficult schedule until they go to Maui, and then they lose 3 in a row in Maui, and the sky's falling. If you're a UConn fan, Bobby Hurley has that, technical foul that essentially came at an awful time to hand them a loss against Memphis. They struggled against Colorado, who surprised people in what's going to be their first year back in the Big 12. And then they just weren't able to close it against Dayton as well. So they've had their struggles, but I think they've righted the ship, partially due to Caravan being back after missing a little bit of time with a head injury. I believe it was a concussion. But guys are starting to figure out their roles, kind of, coming together. And that's to be expected with a Danny Hurley coach team. I've had a chance to broadcast as an analyst a number of his teams in games over the years, going from Rhode Island to the times at UConn I've been at shoot-arounds. They are a well-oiled machine. And yes, they've got a lot of new pieces, but he's going to get them back on track in no time. And it seems like they're trending in that direction. They run great stuff on the offensive end of the floor. They'll disguise one thing, make it look like this. In actuality, it's for that. So it might be, a cross screen, but really what they're looking for is the elevator action off a cross screen, or it might be a curl, quickly turn it around into another curl. Or the first guy, instead of coming off a double, he turns and sets a pin himself to create a double screen. So if you're guarding UConn, you got to be very aware and you got to be very detail oriented in regards to your fundamentals and your philosophies on defense, because something might look one way, but it's really set up to be something else. So you got to be really dialed in and locked into your fundamentals of your defense. But almost an entirely new team for UConn, outside of Alex Caravan, who I don't think got as much credit last year as he should have for being kind of a glue guy, do everything guy, versatile for them last year. And Samson Johnson on the interior, he wasn't much of a scorer last year. They're asking him to do a few more things. Jalen Stewart as well, still coming off the bench. But, if you're a Northwest listener, you might remember that name from Garfield High School in Seattle, played for Brandon Roy. He's got an opportunity to make a jump, and he's been a little bit inconsistent this year, but at least you might know the name being a Northwest guy. But they loaded up in the transfer portal as well. Point guard Hassan Diarra, obviously most listeners to this remember Aiden Mahaney at St. Mary's, who had some big games against Gonzaga. He's been up and down in regards to minutes and production during his short time now in UConn, but we all know how he can get it going from the outside. A couple of the others that are really kind of, in the mix with UConn that Gonzaga is going to have to be able to be prepared for. Would be solo ball shooter. And then Terrace Reed Jr. is a very active 4/3, averages right around 11 points, a little over 8 rebounds per game. But the big thing is no Donovan Clingan, so you don't have that 7'2" massive rim protector like you had last year. Samson Johnson is a good rim protector, but not in the way that Clingan was. You don't have Tristan Newton kind of handling the ball at the point guard, directing everything. And you don't have Cam Spencer, who obviously was a USD transfer, coming in and being able to play such a cerebral game, but really get hot from the perimeter. So those are a couple of things to think about and be concerned about in regards to personnel if you're Gonzaga. But this game, national TV on Fox, Saturday at Madison Square Garden. I think the big keys are going to be match the physicality of UConn. Every time you play UConn, it's going to be a physical battle on the boards. It's going to be a physical battle when you're on offense, because they're going to bump the cutters. They're going to push the screeners out. Low post is going to push off the block. You got to handle pressure with the ball. They're really not going to do a lot of pressing and or trapping in regards to, full court being aggressive in those ways. But they will be opportunistic with their hands if you make a mistake. On the offensive end, I think Gonzaga, as mentioned with your defensive principles, you've got to be aware of everything that is going on because they do such a good job of disguising one action to make it look this way, but really they're just looking for that secondary action, which is, such a difficult thing to guard, especially at the college level, because guys just don't have that experience of seeing it, understanding it, and taking it out like they would if you're in the pros because you've got, just that experience level. So I think the physicality on the glass and handling UConn's physicality on offense in regards to getting to your spots, making the right play under pressure. I think, the handling of the pressure, whether it's that full court or in the half court is huge. And then I think the other thing for Gonzaga is you got to make shots. Point blank. The conversation that's coming up next with Jimmy Dykes, he touched on it. This is another Gonzaga team, very similar to last year's, that struggles shooting the ball from the perimeter, which is very un-Gonzaga-like. And it's something that, they've shown flashes of shooting it really well early in the season. But they don't have one guy, that's, shooting it at a 45% clip with a high volume of shots. They don't have multiple guys that are hovering around that 38, 39%, where you got to worry about two good shooters. So Hickman's had some good games. Battle's had some good games in regards to shooting it from on the 3-point line, but really got to see a little bit more consistency from them. And that's one thing that I hope to see is the ability to knock down 3-point shots for Gonzaga at MSG because it is such an environment. And a lot of times I know these guys have played in big arenas, big games, big events, been in big moments. But there is something special playing in Madison Square Garden. Even as a pro, you kind of always circled that one of the games against the Knicks in Madison Square Garden because it is such a historical, cool venue. And you want to have that excitement. You want to have that, little bit of nervousness in regards to preparing for a game. So Gonzaga, again, ranked 8th, playing against UConn, ranked 18th. UConn 7-3, Gonzaga 7-2. This is going to be a great game. Looking forward to it. Gonzaga's got to get off to a great start. Stay tuned. Listen in with the interview with Jimmy Dykes, and we look to catch up with you next week. Welcome back. Now we get to bring in our guest, someone who I get a chance to stay in touch with through the course of the year a little bit, but more so during the college basketball season, kind of bouncing some ideas off each other at different times. But it's fun for me to connect with him right now because he just had Gonzaga at the battle in Seattle against Kentucky. He saw them firsthand with a couple games down in the Bahamas in Atlantis. I want to get his take on the Kentucky game, what happened in that second half, but also what he sees now that he's seen Gonzaga in person and up close a few different times. So from ESPN, our great friend, Jimmy Dykes. Jimmy, I appreciate you joining.
Dan, it's great to be on with you. I love anytime I get to spend time around Gonzaga basketball. And I got to see him a lot in Atlantis and then obviously in Seattle. But, Adam Morrison was there. I got to say hi to him again. And then during the broadcast, I start throwing out names like the greats of Dan Dickau and Blake Stepp and Matt Santangelo and Jalen Suggs and John Stockton. Just, man, where do you stop that conversation? So I know Gonzaga lost, but man, what a great program and a great brand that everyone has put into that program. So it's a pleasure to be on with you.
Well, I love the fact that Gonzaga, and they've always done this, they've scheduled as difficult as they can in the non-conference. But that Kentucky series where it's year 3 of a 6-year series, where there's some home and homes, there's some neutral site games away from their home cities so more fans can get to it. What was that environment like?
It felt like, and sometimes we kind of overuse this analogy, but it truly felt like an Elite Eight type game because there was a lot of Kentucky fans that like I said during the game, Kentucky could play in Russia. And they're going to have the Big Blue Nation show up and go Big Blue chant start. So especially in the second half when the game got tight, it just felt like there was a lot on the line, and there was, like, that's a high profile resume win for Kentucky. So I love the series. I love the fact that Kentucky and Gonzaga, two of the top national brands out there, we get to see them play, for the next 3 years on different locations. So I took a red eye home, but man, it was a great time in Seattle and a great atmosphere in a big time arena. Climate Pledge is a big time arena. I know they're making a strong push to bring an NBA team back there, and they got a great arena waiting for them.
Well, you look at you mentioned Gonzaga and Kentucky are two of the premier brands. As we record this, at any minute, the new rankings are going to come out. I mean, Kansas has lost twice now. Gonzaga lost. Kentucky, before they played Gonzaga, lost. There's a complete shakeup in the top 10 again. You cover the SEC as well as anybody out there. When I look at teams with potential Final Four aspirations, there's 3 or 4 teams from the SEC, Kentucky included, that should be in that mix. I think Gonzaga should be in that mix. Duke's clearly in that mix with their defense. Where do you see Gonzaga stacking up at this point of the season now that you've seen them up close a little bit?
Yeah, Dan, I agree. They're right there with the best of them. They could start putting odds down of who's going to be in the Final Four, and Gonzaga is going to be right there with the best of them. They did not play their best in the second half. We'll get into that a little bit, but I think this is really unique. You mentioned the AP poll coming out here shortly. We talked about it in our broadcast on Saturday night. The Week 6 AP poll, which we're getting ready to have here within the hour, the past 20 national champions have been ranked inside the top 12 of that AP poll during Week 6 because we've gone through Feast Week and champions and challenges, and also I expect Gonzaga to be in that top 12. It's probably right on the cutting edge. I expect Kentucky to be inside that top 12. So we're deep enough into the college basketball season. We know who the real threats are, and Gonzaga is one of them. Are they perfect? No. They have issues. Yes. Do they need a rim protector? Which I think they have coming back, and I think he's a true freshman, big kid, 7'1", 7'2", that they expect to have back this year. That's going to help them. I mean, offensively they're fine. Defensively, they're not quite yet where you wanted to be if you're a serious national title threat.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Now that you've seen them in the Bahamas, I believe you called one of the games for Gonzaga, but you were around the event, so you saw them multiple times. What are the biggest holes and weaknesses that they have in your eyes? You kind of touched on rim protection a little bit, but then what are also some of the strengths that they have that other teams don't have the ability to rely on?
Yeah, well, it starts with Nembhard, and he was kind of held in check very well by Kentucky's changing 1-3-1 defense to man in the second half and kind of took him out of rhythm, out of their ball screen action. But he's still one of the premier point guards out there. And you guys know that follow Gonzaga basketball, how important that spot is. Hickman can also play the point and fuse best teams. Have had 2 point guards on the floor for a lot of minutes. And then Graham Ike inside he's going to be able to hold his own and score against anyone out there. Kentucky had a lot of length, good defenders on the inside. He had a monster first half. One of the big issues for Gonzaga is how poorly they're shooting the 3-point shot right now. It's the worst 3-point shooting team that Mark Fuse had at Gonzaga. And it showed up and it reared its ugly head, especially in the second half against Kentucky, because they missed some really good looks. And they've got to find that 36, 37, 38 as a team 3-point shooting going forward. Because as you know, what your weakness is in the regular season eventually is why you get bounced out in the NCAA tournament. They've got to shoot the 3-point shot better. Yeah,
that's something that, the analytics have become such a big thing over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years. But maybe this year, and it might be a trickle-down effect from the NBA. You see the Celtics take 63s the other night. You're seeing a lot more of that in the college game where, Pat Kelsey with Louisville was a great example of college. Charleston, he's doing similar stuff where there's such an emphasis on 3-point shooting. And if you're struggling in that area and the other team gets hot, that is a huge equalizer.
It is. And Mark Pope is building Kentucky with that same analytics. They want to take at least 33s a game. Now, you have to have the ability, though, to do something else if it's not happening. And that's what Kentucky did against Gonzaga. I believe Kentucky had 34, maybe 36 paint points, and maybe just in the second half. like when you're on the road in a neutral floor environment and you're down, I don't think you jump shoot your way back into a game. I think you have to have the ability to drive it, throw the thing inside, get fouled, get tough baskets like Kentucky did. So I know the analytics are playing a major part in kind of how we play the game, coach the game, recruit the game. But you have to have something if your fastball is not working. And if your fastball is 3-point shooting and it's not working, you have to have something else to go to.
So let's touch on that Gonzaga-Kentucky game in Seattle. Obviously, that first half was beautiful basketball if you're a Gonzaga fan. 50-34 lead. Ike was, very dominant in that first half on the low block. Nembhard was finding guys. But that second half was a different story. Kentucky came back from 18 points down to eventually win it in overtime. But that 1-3-1 matchup zone where sometimes they passed it off into a man after the first pass or the dribble was entered into a certain part of the floor. Was that the main factor that gave Gonzaga struggles, or was there other things that you saw courtside that gave you the edge to say, you know what, Kentucky deserved this win?
Yeah, Dan, there was a couple of things. The first possession when Pope went to that 1-3-1, it worked. Gonzaga didn't score, and you kind of knew then, oh, okay, this could be what flips this game. And they stayed with it. And you're exactly right. Sometimes they stayed 1-3-1. Very few possessions, I think they truly stayed in that zone. They like you said, they did a good job of matching to man out of that 1-3-1 look. But what it did, it really threw Gonzaga's first half offense out of rhythm. We saw very few ball screens, Nembhard getting downhill with a two-man game. It made Gonzaga do something different. That was a big part of it. The second part of what I saw was when Kerr Kriisa got hurt for Kentucky and had to step out for that game. We know now that he's going to be out 3 or 6 weeks with a Jones fracture in his foot. And Lamont Butler already was not playing for Kentucky. Now Kentucky puts an untraditional lineup on the floor. Jackson Robinson, the 6'6" guard, becomes the point, and it bothered Gonzaga on both ends of the floor. Because now Kentucky had a bigger, longer defender at all times on Nembhard, and it forced Nembhard to guard a bigger, longer guy on his end as well. So it's funny how sometimes you just stumble into things during a game or as a coach. But that big lineup that Kentucky finished the last 8 or 9 minutes with, it was a mismatch problem for Gonzaga, I thought, which really was a big part of the game.
Yeah, well, Jimmy, I really appreciate the time. I know how busy we all get in the broadcasting world once you hit the middle of December. So thanks for your time. Any last messages or words for Gonzaga fans out there that I know I've heard from a number of them that they really enjoy your insight on the program, even though you're an SEC guy?
Yeah, that's the majority of my games, but I jumped all over. I had a couple of options that this past weekend, and I jumped all over Kentucky at Gonzaga, obviously because it was a big time game, and I just love being around that Gonzaga program. You got a great fan base. You play the game the right way. I know it's sometimes discouraging to lose a game like that, but no program's been more consistent. 9 straight Sweet 16s. I think it'll be 10 this year. And the Zags have a lot to look forward to. So I'm a big fan of that program, of Coach Few, of you, all the guys that have come through there. There's just something unique and different about being a Zag. So anytime you want to have me on and talk ball, man, let's make sure we stay in touch.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, again, thanks for the time. Have a great Christmas with your family, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
All right, Dan. Thank you, buddy.